In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up the SNMP exporter with Prometheus and Grafana so that you can monitor all your SNMP network devices. For this tutorial, you're going to need a Linux machine with Docker installed and at least one SNMP network device. For my case, is my Unifi 8-port switch. By the end of this video, you're going to have a Grafana dashboard that resembles something like this. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. So I'm here in my Unifi controller, and to get to the SNMP monitoring section, you need to go to System and then you need to go to Advanced. And if you scroll down, you will see the option SNMP monitoring. We want to keep things secure, so we're going to enable SNMP version 3. And with Unifi, it only allows you to create one username and one password. But don't worry, the password is going to be used as the encryption key and the username password. By default, Unifi uses AES, so this is going to be AES 128-bit encryption. Once you have that set up and ready to go, this is the part that is going to be different for every person, because you might have a Cisco switch or a Linksys or a Netgear or anything like that. You will only need to make sure that you know where to enable SNMP v3. Now we can go into our Linux box. To make sure that SNMP v3 is working properly, we need to install SNMP tools. This will allow us to query the device and see if the configuration is actually working. And so we're just going to install the SNMP network tools. So for this, in Red Hat distribution is DNF install, and it's called net SNMP utils. Now we have a command called snmpwalk, and basically snmpwalk, what it's going to do is going to query the device and it's going to read all the SNMP configuration. To do a walk with SNMP v3, we're going to use the following command. I'm going to explain a little bit what this command does. So it's basically snmpwalk. We specify the version 3, so version 3 -l, the type of login that we're going to use. So authPriv means that this is an authentication with a private key, and our username, as we saw previously here on our SNMP configuration, is admin, and the password is here. So we're going to copy that password, we're going to reuse it here. And then we're going to specify that the type of cipher is going to be SHA and the type of encryption is going to be AES. So once you set up these options, SHA and AES, and you put the same password, and then the last thing that you need to do is you need to put the IP of your switch. In this case, mine is 192.168.0.84. If I do execute this command, I should be able to read the SNMP of my switch. So let's check it out. And as you can see, away it goes. This command might take a few seconds. It's literally reading everything that the SNMP is advertising. All you need to know is that if you're able to do this, your device is able to communicate in SNMP v3. Once that's done, now it's time to create our Docker Compose for the SNMP exporter. So I've created some folders to keep things organized. So we're going to navigate to opt docker SNMP exporter, and this is just an empty folder, as we can see. So we're going to create our Docker Compose for the SNMP exporter. So Docker Compose. This compose file is going to be in the description of the video, so you can also copy and paste. It's going to be a lot easier for you. Grab the configuration, going to paste it here. So the services that we have here is SNMP exporter, container name, SNMP exporter. The image that we're using the version 26. Ports that we need to expose, basically 161 is the port that is being used for SNMP, and 9116 is the web port for the web UI of the SNMP exporter. We're mounting one drive for the configuration, so this is .config, and we're mounting it on /etc SNMP exporter. We're also specifying a command here, and we're just telling it where to look for the SNMP configuration. This is a configuration that we're going to generate in the next step. Our restart policy on let's stop, and we're defining a specific network here. So this is going to be plugged into the Prometheus front end network. Once we set up Prometheus in the next few minutes, we're going to have this network up and running, and we're just giving it a static IP. If you didn't know, you can actually set static IPs for your containers, and this is not strictly required, but it's just a different way, and it's fun. And we're just specifying that the Prometheus front end network is actually an external network, because this network is going to be created by our Prometheus container, which is not yet set. So we're going to save this file. Now we're going to clone the GitHub repository of the SNMP exporter, because we need to use a utility that is in that project called the generator. The generator is going to help us generate our SNMP config that we need to feed to our Docker Compose. Okay, so the command that we're using here is git clone, and we're just going to grab the original Prometheus SNMP exporter. So we're going to do git clone. This is going to download everything that we need. And now we have our folder here called SNMP exporter. So we're going to go inside the SNMP exporter, and inside here we have a folder called generator. So we're going to go inside the generator. We have all the source code for the generator. Now, this will depend on what distribution you're working on. If you're working on Debian based, then I'm going to leave the commands that you need to execute in the description. If you're using something that is Red Hat based, you can just follow along here. I'm also going to leave those commands in the description for sure. First, we need to install some dependencies so that we can compile the generator. So this is what we need to install. Okay, so we're going to say yes to that, install all the packages. Okay, so that was successful. Now we're going to compile the generator. So it's just make generator, and we're also going to compile the MIBs. The MIBs are files that translate the OIDs from our device into human readable forms for us to be able to understand them better. So we're going to execute the command. So this shouldn't take too long. It's going to go ahead and download all the MIBs and it's going to compile the generator. Once we have the generator up and running, we can then generate our SNMP configuration. Looks like that's finished. And now if we list our files here, now you can see that we have the generator binary compiled and ready to go. Now it's time to generate our SNMP config. First, we need to edit the generator config file. So the generator config file is basically what the generator is going to use as a base to generate our SNMP conf. First, we're going to make a copy of the generator file. Okay, so now we have a backup of the file and now we're going to edit the generator. Okay, so we open this with Vim. So there's a couple of things that we need to change in this configuration. First, we're going to add our SNMP v3 authentication. As you can see here, there's only v1 and v2. So we're going to add v3. I'm going to paste that there. And as you can see, this is fairly similar to what we did previously with the Snmpwalk. It's just asking for the same parameters. So version 3, we're using the community version 3, the username, the type of authentication. So in this case, it's authPriv, password, the encryption key, and the encryption protocol. Here we can actually change the name if you want to. You can actually call it public v3 if you want to. The other thing that we are going to edit here is we're going to change what we're going to walk. By default, when we did the SNMP walk, it basically just walks the entire SNMP profile and then just gets all the data. Here we can specify specific metrics that we want to get. For the purposes of this tutorial, there's a couple of metrics that we want to walk. So we're just going to add this in here. It's fairly simple. This is the system uptime, all the interfaces, the RX table, the system name. We have the traffic in and the traffic out and the errors in and the errors out. We're going to do a fairly simple monitoring for this tutorial. So once we have that, we can now save and quit, do generator-m, and we're going to specify our MIBs folder, which is this one right here. And we're just going to ask him to generate. So it's going to generate. And once it's done, now we have our configuration here, snmp.yml. If we actually open this file, you will see that it's fairly similar and you have a warning here that says that this file has been generated automatically. You should not make any changes, any manual changes on this file unless you really know what you're doing. This is why we use the generator. It's a lot easier to translate the MIBs into actual OIDs. OIDs is just like the actual data from SNMP, but it's really hard to read it because it's basically just numbers like this. Okay, so once our SNMP config file is ready, now we're ready to configure Prometheus and the SNMP exporter. So we're going to go back to our Docker folder and into the SNMP exporter. Here we're going to, before we launch it, we're going to make a folder called config. We're going to go into config and now we're going to copy our SNMP configuration file that we just generated. So SNMP generator and SNMP, and we're going to copy it in here, make sure that it's there. Perfect. And before we launch the SNMP exporter, we're going to create our Prometheus Docker Compose. So mkdir Prometheus, go into there. We're going to create our Docker Compose and we're ready to paste our Prometheus configuration file. Here's where we paste our configuration. Okay, so now that we have our configuration here, it's fairly simple. Services Prometheus, we're using Prometheus 2.53, the name of the container, the ports that Prometheus use, and we have a couple of folders here that are exposed. Here we specified our Prometheus configuration file, which is the next step that we're going to create. Our restart policy is unless stop, and here's where we define our Prometheus front-end network. So Prometheus is the first container that needs to be run to generate this network configuration, and after that, all the other containers are going to plug into this network. Once that's done, we're going to save our file here. And now we're going to create the Prometheus data folder. Prometheus data. We're going to give it the permissions of 777. Once that's done, it should resemble something like this. And we also need to create our Prometheus configuration. So we're going to create our other folder here too, which is just called Prometheus. So mkdir Prometheus. We're going to go inside this folder and we're going to create the Prometheus.yml configuration. We're going to do the same thing. Perfect. So this is the Prometheus configuration. Now I'm going to explain a little bit how this works. We have the global scrape interval. That's just a global configuration, the default one. Then we have our scrape configuration files. Here we have the job name, so SNMP. So here we have our targets. In this case is my switch. This is the IP of my switch and the metrics path. And this is basically all the SNMP configuration that it needs. The only thing that you need to change here is the IP of your switch or the device that you're trying to configure. Of course, you can add multiple here. It's not restricted just to one. We also need to add the IP of our SNMP exporter. In this case, it will be the IP of this VM. So this one right now is 153 and the port of the SNMP exporter. Okay, so now we're going to save this and we're ready to launch our Prometheus instance. Okay, so let's start our Prometheus Docker container with our trusted command docker compose, of course. Okay, so now we're pulling the Prometheus image. Perfect. So Prometheus is there. Now we can confirm if our Prometheus instance is up and running. And as you can see, Prometheus is up and running, so we're good to go. Now let's launch our SNMP exporter. Okay, so we're here in the SNMP exporter folder, and now we're going to do again docker compose -d. It's gonna pull the image. Perfect. So it's up and running. And as you can see, our SNMP exporter is up and running. Perfect. Based on our configuration, we can try to read our switch now. So we're going to put our switch here. Remember that we named our authentication as public v3 and the module that we configured was ifmib. So we're going to click on submit. And as you can see, the SNMP exporter is able to scrape our switch. So this means that right at this moment, Prometheus is scraping our switch and collecting all this data. So now the only thing that it's left to do is to create those beautiful dashboards in Grafana. So let's set up our Grafana instance also with Docker. We're going to go back to our terminal. We're going to go back to folder here, and then we're going to create another folder called Grafana. Going into the folder, and we're going to create our Docker compose for Grafana. So vim docker compose.yml. Okay, so fairly simple. Grafana does the service version 10.2.8. The container name is Grafana port 3000. That's what Grafana uses. We only have one Grafana directory here. And our restart policy is on let's stop. And of course, we're going to connect to our Prometheus network that we previously created. So we're going to save this. We're also going to pre-create the folder. We're also going to give it 777 for the time being. chmod 777 the folder. All right, so it looks good. Now it's time to launch our Grafana instance. So docker compose up-d. All right, it's pulling the Grafana image. Let's see if Grafana is up and running. And as you can see, our Grafana instance is up and running. Okay, so the default username and password for Grafana is admin. So we're just going to put that in. Of course, it's going to ask us to change our password. We're just going to put any other password. All right, and we have Grafana up and running. Perfect. So now it's time to create those beautiful dashboards. First, we need to plug our Prometheus instance as a data source in Grafana. So that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to go here into the little menu. We're going to go to connections. We're going to add new data source. We're going to look for Prometheus, add new data source. Perfect. And here we're going to put the address of our Prometheus. Now, because everything is plugged into the same Docker network, we can actually just call out the name of our container. So the name of our container was Prometheus and the port that Prometheus is using is 9090. For the purposes of this tutorial, we can leave all the options by default and then just click on save and test. And as you can see, the Grafana is now plugged into our Prometheus. Perfect. So now we can go back home and we can go to dashboards and we can create a new dashboard. So we're going to create a new dashboard and we're going to add a new visualization. Our default data source is going to be Prometheus. And here we are. Grafana dashboards. Perfect. So we're going to start with something simple. We're going to query the name of our switch. For this type of graph, we're going to use stat. Here we need to use the PromQL language that Prometheus uses to query our Prometheus database. So we're going to click on code and we're going to enter our query. Basically, this is going to query our system name. And here we only have to put what device do we want to query. In this case, it's our switch. Okay, so let's run our query and see what happens. Okay, so we're getting no data. Let's go back and check our configuration. Maybe we missed something. Okay, so we're going to go back to our Prometheus instance. Okay, so our endpoint is down. So let's check what's the error. When I click on it, okay, so it says that unknown authentication default. Okay, so we're gonna go back to our Prometheus configuration file. And this is because I forgot to update the Prometheus configuration. For it to be here on default, we need to put public v3, close that off, and we're going to restart our Prometheus container. So docker compose restart. Going to go back here and now our endpoint is up. Perfect. So now we can go back to our panel here and we can maybe refresh. So now we have some data. Okay, this is not the system name. Clearly, it's just a number. We need to configure our panel. So we're going to configure it quickly. We're going to remove all the options here. There's a couple of things that we need to change. So first, we're going to go to stat styles are we going to go for graph mode none. We don't need the graph. We're going to go back to our query. We're going to go to options, and under legend, we're going to click on custom, and we're going to have our custom label here. We're going to put the system name variable. And the last thing that we need to change is we need to change the text mode to name. So as you can see now, we have the name of my switch, which is the US-8 150 watt Unifi switch. Now, the only thing that we need to change is the panel title. So the panel title, you can change it to anything. I'm just going to change it to name. And with that done, we can click on apply. And as you can see, now we're pulling the data of the name of our switch from the SNMP exporter. Now let's add something more interesting. Let's add the entire traffic of the switch, upload and download. So for this, we're going to add another visualization, and this one is going to be a time series. And here's where it gets really interesting. We're going to add two different queries. First, we're going to add our packets in, and we're also going to add our packets out. This means upload and download. If you remember, this is one of the things that we configured on our SNMP exporter to be able to collect the data from this specific MIBs. So this is where we're going to configure it. So we're going to change this to our switch, which is 84. Same thing for this one, 192.168.0.84. Let's see, just running it like that, let's see what we get. And we have some graphs. Now we need to format the graphs so that we can understand what's going on. First, let's change the legend. So the legend here is just like this gibberish that you see here. It doesn't look very clear. So we're going to change the legend here. We're just going to write something custom like total in, for example. Okay, that looks a little bit nicer. And here we're going to do the same, total out, so custom. Now it's starting to look a lot better. Okay, so now that we have both our queries and we have some data, now it's time to make our graph a little bit nicer. So first we're going to change the panel title. This is going to be something like total traffic. Perfect. We're going to change our legend from list to table, looking a little bit better. And we're going to choose our values of min, max, last, and mean. That's the average. All right, so that's done. The axis, we don't need to change anything here. Now the graph style, I like it to be with a little bit of opacity, so I'm going to put 40. Okay, it's looking better. And I really don't like the dots, so I'm just going to remove them. So show points, never. That's good for the graph style. Now we have to change the standard options because the unit that we're trying to calculate here is actually bits per second. So we're going to choose bits data rate bits per second. So now it's starting to look a lot better. The last thing that we want to create is an override, and this override is going to make it so that the packets in are going to be up and the packets out are going to be down. So we're going to create a new field override. We're going to create a field with name matching a regex, and we're going to put a regex out. Basically, this is going to match anything that in the titles here has out. So in this case, it's just going to be this one. And we're going to override the property with something called transform. So graph style transform, and we're going to tell it to go in -y. So now, as you can see, we have a nice graph telling us all the traffic that is coming in and all the traffic that is coming out. Going to apply, and now we have our total traffic for our switch. Nice. The last thing that we need to do is we're going to create a few more visualizations. Now we're going to create a graph similar to this one, but instead of checking the entire traffic of the entire switch, we want to check one specific port. So to make our lives easier, we're just going to go here more, and then we're going to click on duplicate. This is going to be easier. And we're going to click on edit again. Now we're editing our duplicated one, and we're going to change our query to match just one port. Okay, so now I'm going to add my new query for in and my new query for out. Here we're going to query port number 2. That's why we have the if index equals 2. This is matching the port number 2 on my switch. We're going to hit run queries. And as you can see, now we have a different graph. If we go back to maybe 1 hour, we can see that, well, we haven't collected that much data, but you can see the data is now different. To make it more nice, here in the legend, well, we don't want total, of course. We want to specify what port we're monitoring. There's a little handy variables that we can use here to display some more accurate information, which is pretty cool. So first we're going to select our in, we're going to go to custom, and we're going to add the following. So this is just calling the interface name and the alias that you put to that interface. And we're going to do the same thing with out. So we're going to go down and we're going to custom and to grab the same thing, and we're going to put out. We're going to run our queries again. And as you can see here, I'm just going to hit apply so that we can see it more nicely here. We're going to click on view. And as you can see here, this is the custom name of Unifi to identify ports. So we really know that this is port number 2. And the alias that I put on this port number on my switch is NVIDIA Shield. This is because this is the port that I'm using to connect my NVIDIA Shield. So with that, now we're monitoring all the traffic that is going through port number 2 on my switch, which is going to my NVIDIA Shield. So that's pretty cool. So now we can go back from here. And the last thing that I want to show you you how to do is we're going to create another visualization, and this time is going to be also a stat, and we're going to pull up the uptime of my switch. This is a metric that it's nice to monitor. So we're going to choose a different query. For this metric, we're going to use the following query. So we're going to go for device uptime. I'm going to choose our device 92084, run queries. And as you can see, we have like some weird numbers. We don't know what this means or anything. The way SNMP records the system uptime is actually in centiseconds. So this is just how it is. And Grafana doesn't have a metric for centiseconds. So that's why we're multiplying it by 10. By multiplying by 10, we are converting centiseconds to milliseconds. And we can now change the metric that we want to monitor milliseconds. So here we can click on standard options. We're going to choose milliseconds. So milliseconds. And as you can see right away, we have 7.27 days. So this is the uptime of my switch currently. We can also change a little bit the style of the graph. If we go to stat style, we don't want the graph. So now we have a really big number. And for thresholds, we don't really want the threshold for now. Just make it green, all nice. And once that's done, you can just hit apply. And as you can see, oh, well, we forgot to change our panel title. Go back, panel title, uptime. That should be good. Apply, and let's now move it here. Perfect. We can make it maybe something like big like that. And so with that, now we have a simple Grafana dashboard that is plugged into our Prometheus database that is using the SNMP exporter to scrape all the SNMP data from our switch. So that's all I have for you for today. I hope you enjoyed. And if you did, give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And if you enjoy content like this, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.